Um, Hi everyone, and thanks for coming. I'm Rhea. I'm one of the Young Trustees of the Architecture Foundation, and this is the fourth instalment in our Business as Usual series, which is hosted on the AF's 100 Day Studio. So thanks to Rosie and Alice for keeping it going. This is the last event that we have planned for now, but there are a lot more subjects to cover under the banner of activism in architecture, and I think also a lot more depth in each of the conversations we've already had, so there will be more. But tonight we're talking about communities, urban environments, and how we can work to best serve people that are pushed to the margins of our cities. I think it's fitting that this conversation leads on from our last session, which was called The Colour of Architecture, where we looked at diversity in the profession, because I guess race and cultural difference is one of the things most challenged by processes of gentrification. As always, the intent behind this series is to discuss ways that young architects can engage with cross-professional collaboration, new forms of practice and working structures to push for genuine change. I'm co-hosting today with Jake. I don't know if Jake wants to wave. So I'm just going to give a bit of a brief overview and some context before handing over to him to add some thoughts and introduce our speakers for today. And we'll be coming to the audience as well, so if you have any thoughts whilst we're speaking, please put it in the chat. And I'm going to use my Zoom background to share some images, so you might want to have it on speaker view for this bit. So over the last few weeks and months, the twin crises of the pandemic and the resurgence of activism against racism have caused us to collectively reconsider how and who we value amongst the people around us. Key workers have been health workers, but also people who work in shops, who drive public transport, and who work to clean and maintain public spaces, all of whom tend to be on a low income. We've seen over the last few years a clear stigmatization of low-income tenants in our developments. There was the Poor Doors scandal in 2014 and 2018, and debate around segregated playgrounds last year, giving form to a pervasive attitude about social tenants. This makes clear that a conversation about gentrification and displacement is not only about the provision of housing in terms of numbers and demographic, but also the treatment and integration of those from different backgrounds as that housing is developed. Those from low-income backgrounds may also feel excluded from things like privatized public spaces, which are becoming more prevalent. In being controlled, they can become quite exclusionary as they're continually reset to a blank canvas status quo. Acknowledging the need for democratic public space in the traditional sense, but also third spaces such as libraries, community centres, hair salons and markets for those who find themselves in more precarious positions. I think this idea of a networked home across the city is more important, and these spaces are also ones that are frequently at risk. Some good news in some more bleak times is that Noor, which is a cash and carry supermarket in Brixton and a vital part of the local market scene, has won the right to stay and continue serving the community it's been part of for more than 20 years. But it's not just a cash and carry, it's a place for a diasporic identity to be seen and felt, and the story of its fight is replicated in neighbourhoods across London. I guess we might hear about some of that with David's work in Tottenham, but many other places as well. And I think when we talk about, and these are some images actually of some of Noor's customers, which I thought were really nice, so I wanted to share. But this is the development that's proposed next door to it. When we're talking about displacement, we also have to talk about the capital-driven methods of development that drive these processes, which architects can often become complicit in. I think in these types of images, despite the positive outcome of the Save Noor Media campaign, I think it can be difficult for members of communities to see themselves in these types of proposals. But there are, of course, alternatives. More and more architects are going into public sector roles. Public practice is now in its third year, bringing new enthusiasm and expertise to planning departments across London and the wider UK. This is a mode of work that allows us to speak to larger structural issues about the development and planning. And of course, we're talking about communities, so a lot of the time the solution is bottom-up as well. There are a number of different models for community-led housing projects, from community land trusts to co-housing and development trusts, which have had success across the capital. But as ever, the discussion and the question becomes about maintaining these community benefits in the long run. So I just wanted to mention Nubia Way, which was the first Black-led self-build project in London, but it was in the news at the end of last year as the original builders and tenants faced the possibility of losing the rent discount that they earned through their construction labour due to austerity's impact on their housing association's income. So I think the question broadly is, how can we advocate for the spaces these narratives deserve to have within our built environments? Nubia Way is not just housing, it's the story of a community creating a space for themselves in the face of adversity that continues to this day. And Noor is not just a cash and carry, it's a vital resource for a community maintaining a cultural identity. There are stories like this across cities across the globe, not just in terms of ethnic background or tenure and class divides, but all forms of marginalised culture, such as queer space as well. Beyond not being complicit, how do we work as designers and creative thinkers to challenge the status quo, the remits of the brief, and the expectations of a client, and support the communities that surround us? With that, I'm going to hand back to Jake for a few more thoughts and an introduction to our speakers. So.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ria. Okay, so that was kind of like the attention. Let's think about this stuff. And this is like the intention of the talk. Hopefully a slightly provocative opener. So art and architecture are piecemeal activities if tied to scarcity. That is, if they are dependent on a system that relies on a lack of something to help get the highest price for its products. This is the market. Working harder under these conditions is either a badge of honor or just a state of survival for many practitioners, but it offers nothing new. The issue with state-run architecture is that, again, it does create dependencies. If working for the market feels like running errands for your horrible cousin, then working for the state is like living with your mother. She protects you from your cousin, but there comes a time to move out. And this is where the community comes in. Just the right mix of autonomy and abundance, or at least that's the hope. My opinion is that the market and the state are not bad in and of themselves. If your cousin makes great lemonade, then by all means, they should sell it down the market on a hot summer's day. And when we're just starting out in life, the love from our parents is the best foundation. What I'm interested in tonight in exploring isn't so much the well-documented failings of these two ideas, and I would recommend Kate McIntosh's talk if you want to see the well-documented failings of these two ideas, but your lived experience of this third thing, community and community action. And now I'm going to introduce our third speaker. Amandeep Singh Kalra is a project architect at Brick by Brick and Common Ground, where he enjoys working at the intersection of public and private practice to deliver thoughtful designed homes for Croydon. Deep has mentored, critted, and has RV worked for other practices, but most significantly, he is now a young trustee with me and Ria, co-hosting the brilliant talk which Ria mentioned, The Colour of Architecture, which if you haven't seen, might be in your YouTube suggestions if you're watching this from the future. He believes that good quality, affordability, and sustainability can and should coexist, and is always interested in exploring new approaches to design that can consider all these things. Deep.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Ria, and thanks, Jake. I am going to try and share some anecdotes and I think some stories and my experiences of community. So I just want to start with just saying, what is the point of community, and why are we also concerned with its preservation or cultivation? When we discuss community today, we don't mean the Facebook community you can join that you find at the back of a yogurt pot you just bought. I mean a group of people that care about each other and feel like they belong together. Having a sense of community unites us, and being a part of a community makes us feel as though we're part of something greater than ourselves. It gives us opportunities to connect with people and to reach for our goals, makes us feel safe and secure. Communities facilitate social interactions amongst its members and foster the process of collective identity formation. Collective identity enriches the characters of towns and cities, and a city without community is really a city without identity. So when gentrification threatens to evict the community out of the city loses its identity, and the generic brochures of new developments attempt to paint a fake new identity on the rubble of the marginalised communities they've just demolished. I want to share some of my experiences of community with you today. I'm a first-generation immigrant who came into the UK with my family at the age of 8, with no knowledge of language or culture. I grew up in a council estate for over 10 years, and I disliked every moment of it. I disliked the damp, the cold, the broken windows, the noise, the broken boiler, the overflowing bins, fighting neighbours, the lack of public spaces, the daily racism and discrimination. But what I most missed then was a feeling of belonging to a local community that would give me this sense of care, safety and security, especially when you're outside your comfort zone and in an unfamiliar environment. Architecture had absolutely failed here to create an environment for a community to thrive in this instance. Instead, it created poor quality housing, car-dominated open space, no place to call home. As a social tenant, you don't really have a choice. You're thankful for a roof over your head. I guess the one thing that good came out of this was that it made me want to do something about it, and I decided to study architecture for good or bad. After 10 years living in social housing, my family had the choice or chance to purchase our council home under the Right to Buy scheme, or leave with a council grant and buy our own first family house elsewhere. So without much deliberation, we left our estate after pooling all of our resources together and the council grant. This grant scheme actually no longer exists, and in my mind, this further fuels the use of Right to Buy scheme and a loss of council housing stock, further perpetuating the housing crisis. It was also around this time that my dad wanted to set up his own business, often the case with lower skilled first generation immigrant parents who have often been good business men and women. He set up a small fabric shop inside Tooting Broadway Market in 2009 with every penny he had and more that he'd borrowed. The market is one of the oldest markets in South London, and a vibrant bazaar of fresh fruit sellers, fishmongers, fabric stores, reggae music stores, Chinese health shops, Afro-Caribbean street food, and plenty more. These small shop owners are a part of a small but really vibrant community. The high street, its people, and this market are an inherent part of Tooting's identity. However, over the last few years, the slow spread of the Southwest hype downwards from Clapham to Balham and down to Tooting is really starting to impact this community. Over half of that market is now full of hip bars, restaurants, craft breweries and coffee shops, which are there to serve the migration of trendy Londoners to this part of the city rather than its existing community. These businesses are willing to pay more rent, and this comes at the expense of the long-established existing small businesses that fill the market with joy. Footfall of the market is shifting from daytime-dominated traffic to an evening, nighttime one, further damaging the old market shops that are only open during the day. The rising rents in the neighbourhood are pushing out communities that have been customers at the old Tooting Broadway Market, putting a downward pressure on sales for the older businesses. My dad's revenue has more than halved, with landlords pressuring him to either reduce the size of his shop, pay higher rent, or make way for trendier shops. He chose to halve the size of his shop for now, as that was the only viable option. He thinks he can survive for another year or so in this market after being here over a decade. So, as Ria described, the story of Noor and Brixton is one of many found across cities and towns in London, and gentrification has always disproportionately affected marginalised communities, which is not a new concept, but it is far from being solved. Those wondering if my dad has sponsored this talk tonight, he hasn't, but if you do want a discount once he's on, then mention my name if you spot a fabric store in the Tooting Market. I guess just to summarize with 2 quick points, I think there are 2 key conditions that designers and architects need to actively respond to. Communities exist everywhere, and it is important to gain a deeper understanding of them, help strengthen them, and ensure they are not only preserved, but actually thrive. And secondly, where a strong community does not necessarily obviously exist, the role of the designer or the architect is to create a space that allows for its formation and cultivation, to give a natural identity to a place rather than an invented one.
Deep, I just want, you mentioned that thing that we see in Brixton, you see in Peckham, the migration of trendy Londoners to Tottenham. If you consider, and I would say you're pretty trendy, like, how do you bridge the gap between your own status as trendy Deep and your roots?
I absolutely agree with you. I think there is room for, I think the tricky thing is finding the balance of this coexistence, because I think the spread of London is inevitable, and I think gentrification is going to happen, but I think the power comes in how we protect those communities and heritage, whilst coinciding with this kind of wider new pool of restaurants and bars coming, which are clearly there to serve the newer sort of trendier Londoners, but actually some of the people that have been living there a long time would perfectly love a Franco Manca coming down their road, just so long as they don't lose, you know, their the place where they get their African vegetables or Indian like special spices. So I think it's the balance about, you know, it's not just about what you say quite a lot about the kind of building the new and fighting the old. I think it is this kind of the coexistence is important, I think.
Thanks, man. Okay, we're going to move on to our second speaker, and that is Mellis. Mellis Haward is a director of Archio, an architectural practice with a reputation for community-led housing. I met Mellis when she was glowing with pregnancy bliss at an event held by the amazing Russ, a successful community housing group down in Ladywell, Lewisham. The next time we spoke was a year to the exact day to talk about the scope of this talk and the anxieties of back to normal London. Mellis teaches at the Bartlett, advises a number of London Borough Councils on their design review panel, and she has worked with community groups, local authorities, and community land trusts in the shared endeavour to create affordable, beautiful homes for local people. Mellis.
Thanks, Jake. I feel like Deep did such a great sort of potted history of his life, and I'm going to talk about only my work life, because in a way I come from a different angle, and it's where I'm hoping to make an impact. And perhaps I'm sort of framing this in terms of what you said at the beginning, Rio, about young architecture students maybe graduating right now, like as our Bartlett students are, thinking, what's the future for me? Like, the world has so much going on in it. How can I make a positive difference? So hopefully, I'm quite proud of like where Archio are positioned, let's say. And I hope I can talk a bit about that, probably really briefly. So I think, you know, any young architecture practice, you kind of take anything that's coming when you start. I started with my best friend Kyle, and we did some private resi, we did some random bits and bobs, and like honestly after a few years just had to have a chat and say, what's the point in making other people money and stressing about it when I'm starting a young family? And I also want to bring people in the office on a journey here and I want to share values with the people I work with. So we really took time to consider what was important to us. And I think that ultimately, the fact that we're working in community-led housing is a testament to the work that we did, thinking about what mattered to us and about what it means to be like authentically engaged with the community, because that's our ultimate aim, really, is sort of authenticity and genuineness when we're trying to improve where people live and call their home, as you said. So I think when we're talking about how do you start an authentic relationship, or I think someone said earlier, like, how do you challenge the state of quo of your clients? Well, first of all, I only really want to work with clients who I share values with. And yeah, that makes it difficult to make money, but that's another problem. So I think we try and work with people who we have a partnership with, who we share values with, and who, I mean, broadly, clients who have a long-term interest in a place and in a community. And I think, Deep, you talked about like community being a place of belonging. And I think that's really true for the clients we work with, somewhere that you belong to or that you can belong to rather than that you buy and sell. So I'm really proud to be working with like clients like Community Land Trust, London Community Land Trust, Crystal Palace Community Land Trust, Phoenix Social Housing Association, among others, all who, let's say, not just have a long-term interest in a place, but actually have a kind of long-term plan as well for how they're going to be involved forever. You know, working with London Community Land Trust, which started a few years ago, has been such an eye-opener for me, because these are people who are going to be holding the homes that they build in trust forever. And so it's a totally different conversation around design, around engagement, around everything, around the quality of spaces you're creating, and around your priorities. And I think I touched on engagement there, and perhaps like that's one of the things that in Archio we're really constantly trying to be critical of our own processes and trying to learn about. And I think that one of the key things that we try and do is allow, and let's say want, the engagement process, to the engagement to permeate the design process. So I think that's to do with design in terms of you know, houses, but also in terms of empowering people through a process. So I think there's a really extraordinary moment when you stand on a site for the first time and you meet the people whose back gardens are going to be affected, and there's like a sharing of empathy there that can happen, as opposed to just a kind of dumbing down of what's going to happen to you. Actually, how can you help with this process? So that's something we when we're talking about in this evening, talking about community, that's really fundamental for us as a practice, is allowing engagement to permeate the design process. And as I said, like being critical about the process of design is really fundamental. So I don't think we've always got it right, but every time we do an event or a series of events or even a chat with someone, you know, we're saying, was this a just process? Was this clear? Were we transparent? Was this useful to them and to us? Were we biased? Were we actually projecting what we want to hear on this, or were we really listening with open ears? So, and Jake mentioned that we're teaching the Bartlett, and we had a little bit of pre-chat on the Zoom about that. We're trying to kind of like shift things a little bit and talk about the client. It's a really novel word in architecture school, and it's been really interesting to see how that's been both welcomed and not necessarily totally welcomed. So we're working with the Bartlett undergrad, and essentially the project we're working on is all about housing, but really about engagement and having a client and learning to listen and learning to respond outside of the bubble of an architecture school. So, so really, you know, on the face of it, we're designing houses, but we're really trying to hand over the pen to local people and share the power, because it's a very powerful process being a developer or being a local authority or even being a housing association. And actually, I think that as architects, we can be mediators in that process, and we can shift the balance of power. And in fact, it's sort of within our control, because if we're willing to put the hours in and the commitment, then I think people listen, and if we're willing to demonstrate the value of it as well. And perhaps I haven't spoken sort of directly about community here enough, but I think what I'm really talking about is a process that is, let's say, approachable for everybody in the community. And I think that's really important to think about those people who are marginalised and not normally involved in these processes. And I think we're always trying to understand how we can be fairer in that design process and in that community engagement process. So perhaps that's my angle on this evening, but hopefully that was a useful kind of summary of where we're at Archio.
Mellis, could I ask, maybe you lamented that it wasn't personal enough, and I don't think it wasn't personal, but I completely identify with that problem of projection, especially within architecture. Like, you're kind of it feels like the contract when you enter architecture school is you will get to come up with your fantasies. And then you get that taken away from you when you decide that community is going to be your cause. And it's actually a lot about making yourself redundant. And I just wondered if you could speak a bit about your own, how have you found that own kind of stripping back of your own ego, so to speak, within that process?
I think maybe I shouldn't really tell you how I feel, but I care less and less about design with a capital D and more about process. And I really, really like non-architecture. I really like architecture that doesn't look very designed. Like there's this amazing project which is called Verbricht in Amsterdam. I took my students to, which is a co-housing scheme. It's VRIJBURCHT because no one would know how that was spelled. And it's so bog standard, but honestly, you just want to live there. But spaces are perfect. It's this gorgeous kind of courtyard shape, wide walkways, super simple rectangular housing plans. Not everything's perfect. Don't judge me on some of the ground floor bedrooms, but you know what? It looks like it just doesn't shout about itself. And I'm really into egotistical architecture for me. And I think that's what makes me and Kyle a good combination, because he really, really gives a shit about detailed design, and I'm just such a generalist. Sorry, I can see like Duncan, who I work with here. Shouldn't really tell him that, but you know, that's the truth. I just get so much more out of the process, and luckily I work in a really good team with different skills, so it doesn't matter, and we have different strengths. So, but yeah, I mean, ego in architecture is so misplaced. I basically think, you know, yeah, there's a time for the there's a time and a place. I just think in community-led housing, I just think, you know, we're really talking about, should we have an extra 100 mil on that walkway, or should we have a 20 mil deeper recess on a window? I'm always for the walkway, where Kyle's always for the recess. So it's a nice balance. So.
I like how you gave that a spatial consequence. That was a nice moment. I'm going to have to give up to David, our third and final dude tonight. Let me get up his bio. Right. David is currently an architectural assistant at Studio Weave. He grew up in Colombia, Panama, and the United States before enduring his teenage years in Reading. During his thesis project at Cambridge, he explored spaces of resistance for the Latin American community in London. Following a successful crowdfunding campaign and a grant from the Architectural Heritage Fund, he and two friends designed a community plan for the Latin village at Seven Sisters Market, Tottenham. This is where I met David, and where we once had delicious food and joyfully pondered if the future of community activism was just better marketing. The Seven Sisters Market community plan got big press coverage, and David was eventually invited to present the plan at the United Nations in Geneva. David.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, everyone, for letting me share a bit about my experiences. I think my experiences are almost like a combination, perhaps, of the previous two speakers. The reason why I first got involved in the project was a very personal reason. And that was, to me, Seven Sisters, along with Elephant and Castle in London, they represent these two community hubs, these two centers for the local Latin American community. And it allowed me, as someone who grew up in Colombia, but hadn't lived in Colombia for the kind of preceding 15 years, to really learn a bit about my culture, to experience things like food, that sense of identity, how to speak the language better. I felt as if I relearned how to speak Spanish while I was there. But it also gave me the key to understand a space that I think is otherwise quite well hidden. So through my research, both at Cambridge and at the Bartlett previously, I started looking at these spaces. These spaces, I guess, they felt like spaces of resistance. Firstly, because they almost didn't make sense within their context. If you think of Elephant and Castle, and all the development happening around there, the shopping centre felt like this bastion or fortress of a time long gone, particularly as a 1960s shopping centre that kind of didn't really have as much relevance as it once used to. Equally, Seven Sisters, which is this incredible, vibrant Latin American market, it was, when it was first adopted by Latin American traders, it was created a space of their own within the shell of a building that was purchased by TfL and had been left empty for about 40 or so years. So I felt as if I had this key to understand a space that didn't feel as if it should really exist, a space that is kind of magical and unique at the same time. But it's clearly not unique because there are so many other examples of this happening throughout London. So I first approached just to help the campaign out, realizing that this is a space that I wanted to help protect or support. And we had the opportunity to develop a new community plan for the market, which had previously undergone, or had previously seen 3 or 4 other community plans be developed. The state of the market, similar to the state of the shopping centre in Elephant and Castle, was that it was under significant threat of demolition in order to make way for a regeneration scheme, and it's mostly flats, which would have meant that most of the traders would have been evicted. So with a friend, we decided that this was a cause that we could take on. We set up a stall within the market. We decided to call ourselves after the stall where we were set up. The official name of that stall is Pretty Nails because we worked on the mezzanine level of this unit. And there, over the course of about 8 or 9 months, we developed a plan just by listening to traders, speaking to traders, having meals with traders. But I think early on we recognized that our contribution wasn't only going to be, it could not be just an architectural one. So I think we came up with this strategy, which we used to have on the wall of this mezzanine in a space that used to be a massage parlor. And it was that in order to serve the best interests of the market, we had to fight a political fight, we had to fight an architectural fight, but also we had to find a way to demonstrate the significance of a space like this. So I think over the course of that 8 months, we were really trying to develop a way to work alongside traders to develop their own kind of political agency. And a lot of the time this was an agency that had already existed there. They set up their own units, they built their own units. One of my favorite spaces within the whole of London is within a unit run by a friend of mine called Fernando. When I first went 4 years ago, it was a supermarket. Within 6 months, he bought a coffee table and it was a supermarket and a cafe. 6 months later, he bought a sound system and some laser lights. And on Fridays and Saturdays, it was a supermarket, a cafe, and a nightclub. So there are so many examples of these sorts of spaces that are self-created, appropriated within the market. And we wanted to demonstrate the value of that. And equally, we had to work alongside the traders to develop a scheme for the rest of the site. And this is how we could prove the market could not only survive as this functional market, as this functional space, as this functional resource for the local Latin American community, but it could also almost act as an engine for future community-led development within the rest of the site. So we came up with a scheme that would take advantage of a completely vacant corner building and a completely vacant first floor, introducing more space for businesses, for things like community facilities like creches, libraries, teaching spaces. And what we found was creating the community plan and getting planning permission for that became a new kind of tool that we could use in the political fight. So it's the 3 aspects that we had initially thought of this kind of political fight, the research side and the architectural side, they all kind of linked into one another to create a force that we're kind of still using at the moment to support the campaign. Even at the moment where, due to the coronavirus, the market's been shut for almost 3 months and traders haven't been able to trade. I hope that made some sense. Please feel free to ask any questions you may have, and thank you again.
Maybe just picking up on Mellis's point about being at the Bartlett and how shifting that conversation. I remember when we spoke once, you were saying how vital it was that you'd had that academic rigor kind of holding up some of the structure within the fight back. How do you see that moving in a sort of post-COVID time, or in the, like, where's that at now?
I think it's been really, really useful in using the skills that we have had, that we've been very fortunate to practice and develop at university, to almost expose this richness and this resistance that's already happening, kind of to amplify these everyday activities that that are kind of proving this political fight. At the moment, it's a very difficult situation, because it feels as if, in order to avoid things like potentially some of the fears of what's happening in Tooting, in that market, of this sudden influx of new traders who would potentially displace existing ones, we really wanted to have the existing traders be the guiding force behind any development. So a lot of our efforts recently have been around helping the traders mobilize and almost unionize, so that when a community plan can be enacted, they can take over the building and manage the space as they see fit. So we're kind of removing ourselves from that and letting the existing community and their existing knowledge guide the process from that point onwards.
Thanks, David.
Cheers, thank you.
Right, this is when the melting pot becomes melty, apparently, but we've seen how that's worked. Let's go, Ria, if we've got some questions that have sort of been framing the whole of this series that I think are pretty good.
Yeah, we've had some questions that I think have been helpful to ask across all of the sessions, but I think a lot of them have kind of been talked about already in terms of, you know, the relationships that you need to build. I think that's kind of the pretext for a lot of the conversation that we're having about community. But I suppose maybe a nice question is who we learn from when we're trying to do this work. I don't know if each of you maybe have someone that you could speak about who has informed the way that you work, or someone that you, who you learn from to do the things that you're trying to do.
I've got someone who's a bit of a mentor who I would advise people knowing more about, if that's okay to start. I don't know if anyone knows Stephen Hill, who
yes,
was last year the head of co-housing network or the community housing. He's the head of everything. No, Jake, you'll have to remind me what he was.
He's a trained quantity surveyor, but then he literally sort of just goes around like Batman, helping out like community land trusts get off the ground. He's written extensively on his blog. His blog is amazing, and he was commissioned by the Churchill Foundation. I think it was Churchill. Anyway,
he did a whole research trip around America looking at community land trusts. But really, he is the go-to guy for thinking about co-design. And I think what I've learned from Stephen is about like just blanket generosity to everybody, first of all, as a kind of way of being. I think he's extraordinary. And also, when Carl and I were quite fresh to it, and we were kind of in the shortlist for this community land trust project, I spoke to him. I think I knew him, like my mum's doing a co-housing project with him, I should put my hands up and say. And he really challenged some of our preconceptions about co-design, and really like smashed it on the head about this idea of having any bias and it being kind of proved through a process. And I think that what Stephen brings, which is really hard to get as a young architect, is years of slowly battling through community-led projects. And one of the things you had in your note was like the fine grain approach. Where was it? The fine grain of working with the community. And it's not just a fine grain, it's a long slog. Because I think one of the things that you've also touched on is like, what are the relationships you need for doing these processes? And like David spoke about, it's a long, complex, human-centered process to make good things come off the ground. And I think what Stephen always talks about is like connecting with existing groups, because there are so many, you know, I think architects often approach a problem and think that they can resolve it on their own. And really, we need to be connected and more networked with community groups and support groups, particularly when we're talking about marginalised communities. You know, I don't know about very much, and so we need to connect with people who know more and are more connected. And Stephen has got this grace and extraordinary generosity when he talks about that. And I think that I would recommend everyone reading his blog about the processes he's been through with these long community engagement and kind of co-design workshops. And he's a real mentor for us and has helped at quite a few stages. And I know he's a real mentor for London CLT as well, particularly. So that's my go-to guy.
Does anyone, maybe David, if I come to you, if you have
Yeah, I think what we found is, at least personally, the work that Latin Elephant had already begun in Elephant and Castle was hugely inspirational. Just even as a way of kind of exposing these these hidden practices, maybe these kind of cultural practices that would otherwise be unrecognized. A lot of their research we were able to apply to really advocate for the significance of this space. And I think alongside that, just the campaign group, the first plan to demolish the market, I think, came out in about 2002. And within a few years of that, the community had mobilized and created their own alternative vision that wouldn't require demolishing the market. And that was submitted to planning before the developer even managed theirs. They've been a community that, despite the highs and lows, have, for the past, what would it be now, almost 17 years, have continued fighting. And at every single point when things seem as if they're at their lowest, or where things feel as if they're certain and the building will be demolished, they find a way to get this energy somehow. And I think the energy does come from the traders themselves. Within the market, you have so many traders who have arrived to the UK via Spain or are refugees, and they have this fighting spirit that I think we were able to draw energy from and inspiration from. And yeah, I found, I think over the I think about 2 years that we've been working on this project, that's where most of our support has come from.
David, did you ever think like with community projects and with all, they say architecture is predictions and all predictions are wrong. Like, was there any moments in that process where you thought it was going one way and then the green grass was somewhere else, like the learning that wasn't just theoretical?
Yeah, I think all the time your perceptions of what's important is shifting or shifts. And that's according to the situation, to the kind of the context, if it's like a political context, but also what you learn from other people. And I think even now we still have lessons to learn that we can apply to make what we've done even better, if that makes any sense.
So I think I cut off Deep. Did you want to say anyone who's...
Well, yeah, I think I kind of had sort of sat in between Mellis and David's points. I guess building on Mellis's point about misplaced ego of architects, I think designers and architects just need to accept that they will never know what it is like to live and work in areas that they're designing unless they're actually living, working there, and are deeply embedded in those communities. So there's a real humility in accepting this fact, which sort of then unlocks understanding the complexity of these communities in a more genuine way. So, I mean, I'm in a fortunate situation where I live, work, and design in the same borough. And there's not a lot of people that can say that through Brick by Brick and Common Ground Architecture. So when I'm speaking to residents at engagement events about some of our projects, I do feel that I have a much more genuine understanding of their concerns, being able to say I live 5 minutes down the road and I know what you're talking about when you say the rubbish tips are always full, the parking doesn't work, there's not enough play spaces. But even with my geographical presence there, I know that every ward and every street within the borough is totally unique characteristics. I live in one particular ward, and when I'm going to another ward, it's a whole situation. So I think it's that value needs to be understood. And often architects here, but you don't live here, you don't know what it's like. And I think the answer to this should be, yes, I don't know what it's like, and I want to learn about what it's like to be here, rather than I've done lots of research and this is what I think is important. So I think for me, hearing the powerful stories of the people that live and foster those communities, I get really touched by their stories and kind of their moments. And I think that's been really inspirational for me.
I think I agree. And I think that's when it becomes most fun for me as well.
What, when you actually becomes like a conversation?
When you feel as if you're a bit beyond just scratching the surface, where it almost feels as if you're developing a friendship and a personal relationship with people rather than just sort of designer-client relationship.
It's also good when people are really, really rude to you and you have to actually face like NIMBYism in the face. or and then realize that it's not NIMBYism, it's actually fear, and like really well placed fear. So like, yeah, I also feel really good when you have a good conversation with someone, but I feel really extra good when you overcome like someone's real anxiety and stress and genuine like shitting themselves about the fact that there's going to be overshadowed of their lovely garden and their plants they've planted for over 20 years. That's really, really intense. And so, you know, when you overcome that, that's massive. So I hate it and love it. Yeah, but I think that's what it comes down to, isn't it? You know, difficult conversations being had authentically is kind of important.
Totally.
Kind of, I was just thinking about friendship and like, you know, what you're saying about it becomes a friendship. You know, like nepotism is a horrible. Nepotism has quite rightly got some bad stick because it's an awful process of sort of the wheels of power. But on a sort of community level, friendship outside that kind of more political idea seems quite radical. And I just wondered, like Deep in Croydon, if you know everyone in Croydon, does it feel kind of weird? Does people in the office go like, Deep, you just turned into the mafia of Croydon, how have you done it? Like, is it feel that friendship have a tension?
Croydon is pretty big, and one thing is pretty good, that there's nothing happening right outside where I live, because as with what Mellis said, I think I've come across a lot of people who wholeheartedly would say, I know this needs to happen, and I know we need to build social housing, and I know that people have been in temporary accommodation or homeless for 15 years or 10 years or whatever, but I just really don't want it in my backyard. And that then kind of building on that, you know, there was this one time I had somebody, they were building on an area of garages, so it's not Greenland or anything like that. And he was like, I have a garage there. And I'm like, oh, what do you put in the garage? Storage? He was like, no, I've got a classical car in there, and I've got a house about 5 miles away with 3 other cars. And I'm like, well, this is great that you got a classical car here, but what we're putting here is 100% affordable housing. And I think we're weighing up 3 people's garage spots for this versus, you know, 20 people on a housing register getting a place to live that they've not had. And then I think you really start to, because it's a conversation about the balances of pros and cons rather than them coming in to fight you. I think you really have to break that fight down and do it at a one-to-one basis. I've been in rooms with mob mentality, you know, 50 people shouting at you, you're building 100 houses, but where's the schools? Where's the GPs? Where's the hospitals? Like, and I think when you leave that mob mentality and speak to people one-to-one, actually, you find that 90% of those people are supportive. And it just needs one person to aggravate the whole crowd. Yeah, so.
That one-to-one sounds a bit like maybe with one of the, not elephants in the room, but we haven't acknowledged London Citizens. I don't know how many people have come across their work, but London CLT, for example, was born out of London Citizens, and they still use a lot of the same toolkit for tackling those bigger problems. So, like the one-to-one is something we've been using in Greenwich. And it's just, you're 100%, but I heard a really good analogy. It's like, if you face a lion one-to-one, everyone reacts differently. Some people go to hug it, some people run out the door. But if you put a lion into a hall, everyone runs for the exits. And that's the mob mentality. Anyone else got like a kind of other tools? I'm sure a lot came up in that Bartlett crit you did, Mellis, for tools.
Yeah, I mean, I also worked directly with Lewisham Citizens Group on the London CLT project. And it was, I mean, to be honest, the relationship there and the support of them is what made that project a success as a grassroots process, because of the time and energy put into that. Like when we were doing some engagement, you know, oh my God, I've forgotten his name. I'm so sorry, but the incredible guy. Anyway, he was like, I really feel like there's so many people who aren't here, let's ring on some doorbells. And then we heard about people who were busy because they're single parents, or they're like housebound for some reason, or they're just busy. And so we were knocking around. I mean, days went by meeting everybody. The time commitment that they put into that made that CLT project a success. And we always bang on about how we got like over 100 letters of support, but I feel quite sometimes a bit disingenuous, because I know it was our work in combination with their footwork, let's say. But talking talking about one-on-one, you were saying, Jake, so I've slightly lost track of the question.
Yeah, it was kind of the double one of London CLT and the one-to-one. They always seem to go hand in hand. And then we've got to hand over to some audience questions.
Yeah, like, but talking about one-on-one tools of engagement, I think it's really interesting. And yeah, we engaged our Bartlett students to create a tool for engagement in their first year project. And that in mind was for them to consider who their client would be and how to engage with them well, and even engage a tool. And the themes that came out were like so interesting. So we had themes of kind of art installation as engagement, so it's sort of with the power to shock, or intergenerational kind of game playing as a kind of knowledge share. You know, we had like co-creation, so making dolls houses together with young children, so like kind of age appropriate communication. Then we had literally like creating the tool, creating the stamp for sharing design drawing, because so often people are nervous to pick up a pen or add to a map or something. So it's about creating tools. But I think what really came out of that is like, why do we do these things? What are we asking for in this process? You know, you can have a really clever game and you can have a really beautifully designed community engagement tool, or a bus that opens, every flap opens, blah, blah, blah. But when we kind of reflected on this recently, we invited the artist Verity Jane Keefe to kind of reflect on this actually at an event on Monday. And she really said, this is all well and good, but how did this impact on your project? What is the point of engagement? And I think that a one-on-one conversation is really fundamental to do the ultimate thing, which is to authentically understand somebody else's point. If you're just presenting to a room or you've just got boards on a wall, how are you really going to get that quiet person or that shouty person who's shouting for the sake of it to really talk to you? So yeah, and I think, Jake, when we spoke before, what I felt this really boiled down to was all this one-on-one time. If you don't have someone like Lewisham Citizens, it's really expensive. And so I think it's really important to be talking about the cost of engaging with the community if you don't have that support, and the value of it. And I would just reference, like we talked about people that you think are useful, but also there's really good information out there about the value, the financial value of social value. And I think we should be talking about that more and more, because it's all well and good to talk to each other who agree about putting the time into these things and engaging with marginalised communities and people who aren't normally involved in this process. But unless we're equipped to convince others, I think I said this before, we're sort of just talking to each other. So since we spoke, I've been looking into it, and like some people in my office as well. And there's some brilliant reports by Cabe Space about the value of social value that really like nail it. It's hard to monetize it exactly, but talk about the kind of long-term social health, social benefits, health benefits. And especially when we're experiencing lockdown, we all know that quality public space, quality community facilities are so fundamental, and more so now. So sorry to sort of take it on another angle, but I sort of think it's really important that we
want to avoid the approving void.
Yeah, I suppose also as an architectural community, if we're all supporting each other, we can't all be doing work for free, endlessly spending our weekends one-on-one talking to 6,000 people. You know, this when a state regeneration happens and you have to get a vote as a local authority for, a community ballot, you should see the numbers they spend on outsourcing that kind of work. I mean, we're talking like 100 a pop for like one vote yes. I've been to a few things like that, you know. So the fact that as architects we're bringing that skill to it, but it's the struggle to be paid to do it, I think it's fundamental. Sorry, I'm a bit always bottom line, but it's sort of true. But having said that, engaging with a really, really active community group is your first step to success, because you're also then embedded in years of people wondering what's right for their area.
Brilliant. Shall we hand over some questions?
Yeah, we've had a question from Alicia. If you would like to ask it, I will unmute you. Try to press the button. Yeah, you should be unmuted now.
Hello everyone, brilliant conversation. Just to say, I just wanted to ask about the kind of course, the elephant in the room, of which there are many, is the fact that this is sort of a problem that's huge and structural, i.e. the kind of politics and the economic structures that make the value of what you're all trying to do and the value of the voices that aren't heard marginalised. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how we can engage the architectural profession or students to engage in that bigger political battle.
Won't mind if I have a crack? I think that we've all been thoroughly waterboarded in lefty thinking, and I like a bit of lefty thinking, but I wouldn't mind knowing where the green shoots are in the market. So I think the market has a certain autonomy to it, which gives you a right. And I would like to see architects pursuing options inside the market which are community focused, because then you've got the abundance of the idea of the community, but with the, I'm not waiting for this, well, like I'm in Greenwich, we're still waiting on the council to give us some land assessment. And it's just, they just sit on you. And then the other structural point I want to make is the one that the guy, Danny Doyling, makes in All That Is Brick, about how it's not actually a hardware problem, it's a software problem. Like, we've got plenty homes, and we're scrabbling around in London for these scraps of land for building, like, what, max 30 units, when if we could crack the software problem, which is the housing crisis, then I think if architects could put their minds to that at student level, but because architects are so interested in the shiny objects, which is materials and architecture and all that good stuff, we lose some good minds which could be put to that problem.
How about, I don't know if any of Mellis, David or Amandeep have something.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake's, oh, I muted myself. No, I'm not muted. Jake's,
no, you're not.
The, let's say, like, under-occupied housing, massive houses by older people, right? We all read that if they would only move to lovely, I'm again looking at Duncan, lovely rural flats, then the housing crisis would be resolved. This is like mine and Duncan's shared pursuit. I mean, it's mostly Duncan's, but I'm really interested in it. And I think that actually the reason that, for instance, we started teaching at the Bartlett was because there was a call out from the students for new units that were more socially engaged and actually really fundamentally more engaged with the climate crisis. And I think that, so there is a grassroots movement. And I also suppose, I think you have to do what you can in your sphere. So when we're working with Community Land Trust, I'm very motivated because it's demonstrating something. It's not going to make a, what is it, the phrase, piss in a puddle or something. It's not going to make any difference, those 11 flats, really. But the fact of it makes a massive difference. The fact that it's possible. So if you can demonstrate an argument for something through your work. So that's why with that project, I'm so motivated by keeping it in budget, because otherwise it fails and then it's a massive failure, right? So what am I trying to say? I think, yeah, you can only work in your sphere, but you can push at the boundaries of it always. You have to put your values at the front. And I do believe, from being in education at the moment, there are genuine green shoots of people who put this as their priority. But I can't sit here and say that I can answer the massive societal structural problems with not being people-led, but being profit-led. That's not something I can answer today. The only thing that I would say that I feel positive about is that, you know, as a young practice who are outwardly people first focused, you know, we've had some really interesting commissions recently from like Transport for London and other people who are really like saying, what is this about co-housing? What's that? You know, and like, what is that? What's it going on around the world? Well, how do people really live like that? So, you know, I'm really, and we have to kind of, I get really excited, but we have to present a kind of serious face of how that could really happen. But, you know, I think particularly when we're dealing with cities getting denser and denser and communities having to live closer and closer, and there has to be more sharing, you know, that we can't be living behind picket fences forever. We're all going to have to share public space and frankly, you know, lawnmowers and everything, and washing, you know, it's going to have to happen. I think that we can only catch up on that as architects and try and be ahead of the curve so that when it becomes a necessity, we're ready. That was a bit rambling again, but I suppose I don't have the answer, but I see some positive signs.
How about David? Do you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I don't feel as if I have an answer either. I feel as if it's going to take a lot of experimentation. The success that we have had, I guess, to try and create this to turn something that's quite localized into a wider movement potentially, is by partnering with other organizations, other campaigns. we had some success working alongside the New Economics Foundation, and that helped the community plan become something more than just a community plan and more into something that's maybe a model that could be followed. But yeah, I feel as if I don't have an answer, unfortunately.
I don't think what I'm going to say. I think it probably adds to both of your points in that there is definitely movements happening. I think across the sphere, and I think I moved to working with Brick by Brick and Common Ground Architecture, which is Croydon Council's own development company. As with the last 4 or 5 years, we've had this surgence of local authorities literally taking up development back again since the government lifted the cap on borrowing. And I made that shift because my last project it was while I was working at Levitt Bernstein, and my last client was Islington Council building 100% affordable homes. And I really, at that point, it just struck me that I don't really fancy designing for private developers anymore, just because the shift in the priorities for me, I just couldn't go back to, me working very hard in millimeters to produce something so that it's more money in the shareholder's pocket, when I know that when that's happening for the council, it is genuinely a reason for a lack of money for people on, a housing register. And I just totally related to my own background and wanting to do that. So I think this sort of semi-quasi-private public setup that a lot of development companies are doing, yes, they do also build private homes for sale to help fund some of the more the 50% affordable work they're doing. But then if there is any profit left over, that is still going back into the local authority. So I feel that when I'm much more aware and in tune about costs as an architect, as Mellis was saying, that you're really invested in making sure the budgets work, because in a traditional practice, I used to get so frustrated when a developer would tell me you need to halve this because of X, Y, and Z. But actually, when you're seeing the figures of a budget in a kind of report that a council is running, you really are behind it, because it's either not going to get built or it's going to get built. So it's
deep. You see with your first story about you growing up on the estate and you missed the sense of community. What do you think a move towards estates going for right to manage? We've seen one out in West London, which has now moved from council estate to almost a CLT model, and reminding people that community land trusts are exempt from right to buy. They're outside Thatcher's loophole. So, Deep, as someone who's working from the state side of things, would you look to push that model within Croydon?
I definitely think, I think this sort of management process by the residents and tenants inherently just makes everything, if you care and belong and live in a place, you're just going to look after it better, and you're going to grow things and plant things and maintain the places in a different way to a private company that's being paid to do the bare minimal when something breaks.
But would Croydon Council ever consider sort of taking themselves out of the picture and letting that turn into a community-led project? So they, like the mother, they help instigate it, but then say, hey, it's time to move out and let the community take over.
I mean, I can't single-handedly speak for Croydon Council, but I would like to think that, I know, I wish I could. I would like to think that that is the direction we could go in, because already, firstly, there has to be a shift away from anything else we build now. We just cannot give it up to right to buy. Like we're just basically reversing the process. And I think some of the schemes that were set up when I was in social housing gave things like grants to allow people to move out, which disappeared. And for me, that's frankly, that needs to be brought back. If there isn't right to buy, there has to be something else. If we want to keep the stock we have and grow it, there is something else that has to be done, and that has to be one of them, whereby, like you said, the CLTs are exempt from right to buy. It has to, and I think we're setting up through a housing association type method whereby our houses, affordable rent homes, won't be able to be right to buy purchase either. So that's a small step towards it. But I think your point about estate managed and community managed space, I think, is something that we should definitely be looking at and working on.
Ria, do we have time for more questions?
Yeah, I think maybe we could have wrap up with two that are somewhat similar from our from the perspective of people finishing studying. There's one from Ioana who's asked me to read it out for her, which says, what tools and languages did you find necessary that were not taught in school? And how do you all think that we need to change the canon in order to educate architects that can and wish to engage with the communities they design for. So I guess bearing that in mind, I'm also going to go to Betty to ask her question, and we can maybe bring the two together. If you are okay to read it out, Betty. Where are you?
That's fine. Hi.
Great.
I really loved the conversation this evening. I think it's been so interesting. Just hearing all the work you guys have done in within community space has been really inspiring to hear. And I guess the question is kind of about what advice would you want give to people who, you know, are keen, like all those students and things, like for example Mellis, who are probably graduating and want to practice in a way that facilitates meaningful community engagement, and like what kind of the steps do you think they should take, and who should they be engaging with to make it happen?
Can I answer that one if I'm not muted? Yeah. Is that like all those two questions? I think.
Apply for a job at Archio.
Yeah, I was about. Okay, so I've got sort of two things to say about that. I think if you want to demonstrate something you're interested in, if you're not being taught it in school, you just have to do it yourself. And I don't want to embarrass Kate Ridgway, who's on like hanging in the background on the call, but she works at Archio. And when she applied for a job, she basically had done this really fascinating project called Earth Think Tank, which was totally self-initiated or like initiated with a group of friends. And it just, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? She'd done it because she was interested in it. And she was also able to be, what's the word, critical of the process. And it was I suppose what I'm saying is you need to use your initiative and find the thing you're interested in. Think about how your role could be in that as an architect, what you could bring to it.
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh, maybe my internet's gone a bit funky here. You're all looking really bored and still. The other thing I wanted to talk about was like thinking about your audience. So one of the things we haven't touched on is like young people in community engagement. Really, really hard to reach. And I think if you're just finishing university, you're like younger than me, and you're perhaps more empathetic, and so in a better position to do that. And I mean, there are kind of some quite formal ways it's being done. I was quite intrigued to hear Madeline Lundholm of Karakusvik Carson Architects talk about a big estate regeneration project where they'd actually paid young people to be part of a kind of continuous reference group, because it's so hard to get young people to consistently turn up and be there, like even at 2 events, let alone 1, you know. So I think there's massive scope for young graduating architects to, let's say, like curate, design a community engagement process really specifically for engaging with young people, because and I think Dinah Borat is a fantastic, I hope I said her name right too, but is a fantastic person to reference in terms of what you get out of engaging with young people, like the positives and the way it really improves the design process, really genuinely. So I think that, I suppose in summary, like do it yourself, think about your unique selling point, which is that you're young and you can empathize with people who are also young, and that it's really hard to do. And like older architects, that's tough, you know, you're out your comfort zone there. Those one-to-one conversations are not as easy when someone's got, like, sorry to generalize, but I'm, you know, getting closer to 40, but when they've got one earphone hanging out their ear and you're wondering if they're listening to you, like you feel a bit anxious, you know. People are more comfortable with their own age group. So but I think that also ask your school to prioritize more real life issues. And what's really great about thinking about community engagement in school is it's also like impactful and engaging with a wider community. And isn't that really important for schools to be connecting with their own network too, rather than just building like pavilions? Yeah.
Can I say on the school point, don't, like, we're all sitting on diamond mines. Like, you can use the school you have. If you're at the London School of Architecture, I think you're out there, Betty, like that is your community. You don't need to go outside your door. Start at home. Like, that's your people. So whatever tools you learn within that environment, you can apply to when you go back to Greenwich, like I am in now. Like CSM, you have to, you know, that's where I was at doing my thing, and then you have to start again. David, when you were doing it at Latin Village, they went mad with the Nike sponsorship, and they had all this like crazy like community vibes. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think my advice is, I completely agree with everything Mellis has said. I would say just do it together with other people, and that really helps with the risk of it. So I partnered with my friend Ben and my friend Jamie, and together we were able to kind of access so many more resources than we would have individually. Through that, we're able to raise, I think around, how much was it? I think around £9,000 through crowdfunding, and then that was topped up by a grant from the Architectural Heritage Fund to total around £25,000 just for the development of this community plan. And we also got grants from other sorts of organisations. You do have to be quite wily, I guess, to sell yourself in certain ways, be quite crafty as well in how you get a certain amount of money to support you. But I think just, yeah, doing it with other kind of motivated friends and taking that risk, taking that initiative.
Friendship. It's David's birthday today, everyone. He's 30, so just shouts out to David being 30.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure you appreciate that very much.
It's trying to hide that.
Is that any other questions?
No, but I think, did we have deep on that last one? And then maybe we can...
I think I was, yeah, all I would just say on that is I think just be very intentional in what you pursue as you come towards the end of your studies. I think whatever experiences I've had have been really good in shaping where I've got to, but I think in some instances I've not necessarily followed the vibe, but not kind of given myself 3-4 options and gone, really, is this the best one for what I personally want to do? And I've kind of got something going, this sounds great, let's go for it. And it's been good in the sense that I sometimes don't think twice and then just put my foot down and go in a direction. But I think there is, especially with the types of things architects are doing now, be it through, wholly community-led organizations, like whether it's We Made That, Make Good, Resolve Collective, or organizations like that, versus practices like Archio that are, pushing the way in, focusing their skills towards community land trust and working with communities, with local authority-led developers and in-house architects. There's the kind of traditional mode of architecture, I think, is definitely developed into something that's much broader. And I think students are probably aware of it and need to kind of really think which angle do they see themselves developing in as an architect and a young designer. And I think that would be the advice I would give.
Right. So the resource section, does anybody want to shout out any things? I've written down a few things that people can freeze on YouTube later, but if anybody wants to give a shout out to anything specific, then you got that.
And sorry, I keep adding things, but I've just got another thing that's, I think, a really, really useful article to read on this exact subject. Ifeoma Ebo, she's an American researcher, wrote about building resilience and inspiring justice by design. And this whole theme of just cities, I think, is a really rich thread aligned with this. And she basically, well, I could read them out, but I'll just put it on the chat. But she has these kind of seven key points you need to achieve with any kind of community engagement housing project, to do with investing in dignity. Oh, you've got them all there. Okay, I can see that Alicia holding them up. Yeah, invest in dignity, light the night, expand into public spaces, prioritize youth, consider maintenance. This sounds sort of boring, but they're really important for this subject. Enable social connections and start with what's there. I think her article, I'll add it to the chat, is her article is really, really inspiring, and it's a kind of, I think, something to test all of our projects against. Alicia has something to say.
Sorry, yeah, I'm really happy to put a list of stuff together, if whoever I should send that to. One brilliant thing was one of the bedtime stories for the Architecture Foundation last week was a reading by Catherine Ince by Tiesta Gates, which had 10 principles for a kind of community work, social activism. So I'd recommend people go and have a little listen to that, because that was just brilliant.
Yeah, that really was. He really mentioned the importance of intuition. Also, cheers, Joseph. I did spell Bornat wrong. Have I got it right? Yeah, there we go.
She was
dyslexic out here. My bad.
One of our speakers at our first talk. You should get it right.
Oh yeah, I think I spoke to her.